Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the MotoGP-Xtra podcast. Joining myself as always is Reese, also known as Biker Gaming. Now, round 9 of the MotoGP calendar comes from Barcelona, and Reese, it was a hot sticky day. It was pretty much 3 days of hot sticky action in Barcelona. What did you make of Moto 3? We're actually going to jump to the race direction later in the podcast. Usually we start off with a bit of arguing about the race direction, but we have a little corner towards the end of it. We have a few riders actually getting in on it as well. So we're going to start off with the Moto 3. What did you make of the race in the scintillating heat in Barcelona?
Well, it was a pretty interesting race, a good Moto 3 race as usual. I was thinking after the first two races of the day, Moto 3 and Moto 2, that we wouldn't have to discuss the race direction. Obviously, we are going to have to do that later, so that is a bit of a shame. But we'll stick with Moto 3 for now. And really, it did look like all weekend Dennis Foggia was back on the pace. He looked like he was going to be able to try and win. Obviously, he made a big mistake in Mugello, crashing on a tear-off. Yep, apparently. I don't think that's really the case. I think it was a bit of whiskey throttle, but, we'll give him the benefit of doubt. We'll say it's a tear-off. And then this time, he was running pretty quick. Obviously, it was a big leading group. He wasn't he was at the front of it. He wasn't actually leading at the time, but he had been throughout the race. Obviously, there were lots of slipstreaming at Barcelona. If you remember back to last year, how big of an issue slipstreaming was. They were all backing off. Fortunately, we didn't see that this year. But Foggia, he was running pretty well. He was looking pretty good. He was probably just sitting back, maybe looking after his tyre a little bit, because like you said, it was an extremely hot weekend. There was no grip all weekend as well. Everyone was struggling for grip. One of those weird circumstances where it's that hot. There's just no grip. The tyres spin, so they just wear out so much, even when you're not necessarily pushing so much. They just spin so much because of how hot it was. So Foggia sat there. He probably just looked after his tyre a little bit, and unfortunately his chain broke. Not something that you see too often with the Moto3 bike, especially with the Leopard team, a very reliable team. And the chain broke. I think it was theorised that it was potentially caused by him going on the curb at turn 7 earlier on in the lap, and then his chain sort of broke on the run into turn 10, which is obviously a couple of corners later. So that was something that was pointed out. I think it was Alex Lowe's pointed that out, that potentially could have been what broke the chain there, but just so unfortunate for Dennis Foggia, just such a shame. And that could really be his title campaign completely over now, because that's 2 no scores in a row, with his rivals Guevara and Garcia right at the front once again. Yeah, I think that might be curtains for Foggia.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I think a lot of people put a lot of pressure on poor Dennis, saying that it was like, oh, it's nailed on, Foggia has his title, the rest of he might not show up. He has it done. Everyone was like, oh, it was the most nailed on thing that he was going to win. And he's never been a great kind of scrapper or battler. He's always been brilliant getting to the front and kind of just managing races that way. He has good pace on his own. But Moto 3, like, you're rarely out front unless something has happened behind you that has caused a bit of a gap. So, again though, Mugello, tear off, I don't believe it for a second. We speculated on the last podcast that maybe it was a bit of a damp patch. It had been raining throughout the weekend in Mugello. He's convinced it was a tear off. I'm not convinced, to be brutally honest. It's just too many variables to say it was a tear off. But
I think it's just a mistake at this point, to be honest.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
a wet patch if it was that. So
yeah, I think so too. And it was just a weird one. I don't like when they blame tear offs. Like, it's a bit of a weird one. But anyway, we'll move on to that. This weekend had, again though, all weekend he has such great pace because he can ride on his own during the practice. He gets to the race and he just looks like a top 10 rider. He doesn't look like the same guy come race day when other bikes are in battling with him. Something he really needs to improve on, because if it was like a Super Bowl championship, he'd be world champion by a mile. He's brilliant at doing laps on his own, but as races go, he usually doesn't get given space. He's dive bombed, he's slipstreamed, he's ruffled, and he's a bit like Maverick in that case. He can't seem to do it, and it might have cost him his Moto 3 pretty much nail on championship that everyone had said. But it was quite unfortunate to see his chain go, because he was still in for a good, probably podium maybe. At that point there was still pretty much a huge gaggle of riders in the top 20, 25 I think were still battling for points, so he could have done well, but I pretty much am nailed on that his championship is gone, just because the fact 2 no scores. The Garcia and Guevara are rapid. There are some young kids coming through that have just taken no prisoners, so he's not going to get any respect as well as he doesn't seem to be able to win in a battle. But moving on from poor Foggy to someone who's on cloud 9 after Mugello, Guevara, well strategized win. What did you make of his performance in Mugello after losing his race win in Mugello? What did you make of his performance in Catalonia?
Well, it was fantastic. It was really, really good. And Guevara, he's been very impressive since he started in Moto 3. If we take Pedro Acosta out of the equation, we'd be all raving about how good Guevara's rookie season was. He was there or thereabouts, he was always there. I mean, even from his first race, really, he was fighting in the pack. Obviously, he won that weird race at Austin. And then, of course, like you say, he in my book, I mean, obviously, of course, he did go on the green in Mugello, but he won the race still. He knows that. Obviously, he did probably gain a little bit by going on the green. But equally, Garcia weaved at him going towards the line. So, two wrongs there. So, Guevara really, in his head, he knows he had the pace to win at Mugello. And here, it was amazing. He was just sort of in the pack, like, as he always was, battling. But then at one point, he just got into the lead, just turned up another gear, and just bolted, and no one could get near him. He just started he looked like Foggia. Foggia did all weekend, really. I mean, Guevara and Foggia were the two all weekend that could do the laps on their own and pull away. But Guevara in the race, once he got to the front, and he just decided to check out, he was gone. No one could keep up with him, not even Garcia. And really, those two have been the two that have been able to do that. We've seen a few times this season where maybe at the start of the races, the KTMs have pulled a little bit, and it's always Guevara and Garcia at the forefront of that, maybe Onshu as well. They're always able to go with whoever's quickest, but Guevara just rode away from him. It was fantastic. It was a bit Martin-esque almost, where he could just sometimes pull out those gaps in Moto 3, and just a dominant victory. And Guevara really helping himself out in the championship. He could win this, yeah. He really could.
I am pretty much a big fan of Guevara. I really like him. I appreciate Sergio Garcia's skill and his aggressiveness, but I think he oversteps the mark along with Onshu. So the two of them do things that I'm not too happy with a lot of time. I would like to see Guevara take this title. I do believe he's quick enough. I believe both of the Aspar bikes are probably your 1 and 2 men now in the championship. You could maybe throw Messia in there and Foggia. Messia had actually a decent weekend overall. Bad qualifying, worked his way through a few crashes and got a decent result. But I still don't believe he has that week in, week out pace of the two in the Aspar team. But we're going to move on now. A shout out to a very, very impressive rookie, David Monroe, in his second race. Neil Hodgson nearly screamed his lungs off for the whole race talking about him. He was impressive. Crazy moves, nothing over the limit, just really aggressive, fair riding. And what did you make of the rookie? What do you think he can do for the remainder of the season?
Well, it was almost Pedro Acosta-esque, really. Battling right for the win in your second race. Absolutely fantastic. We've heard stuff about him. We've been hearing stuff about him in the past, to be honest. I remember when he got announced as the rider for BOE. I'd heard of him previously before that. And usually that's a really good sign. If you hear of these kids when they're in the junior championships, there's something special about them. You hear about Quartararo. Those are the kind of riders you hear about. Look what he's doing now. Those are the riders you hear about when they're like 13, 14 years old. So Munoz, he was mighty, mighty impressive. Mugello, his first weekend of Grand Prix, I think he did pretty well, to be honest. It was a bit under the radar, but he was there or thereabouts. But today, unbelievable. He didn't qualify very well. I think he was about 20th on the grid. But to finish second place and to have led the race for a couple of times as well, it was just fantastic. Like you say, he was pulling aggressive passes, but nothing over the limit. He didn't have contact with anybody. He didn't hit anybody out the way. He didn't move in the braking zones. He didn't weave. He was just pulling passes that were a bit aggressive late on the brakes, but absolutely more than fair. And to be honest, I really want to see more of this kid. I am looking forward to see the rest of his season. I'm not sure exactly, whether he'll be competitive week in, week out, because of course it's Catalonia, a track where, they go there in Junior GP, they go there in the Spanish Championship. It's a track he will know very, very well. So it'll be interesting to see how it kind of goes into the following races, see how competitive he is. Also a bit of an asterisk next to the team itself, which is no disrespect to the team, but just in the past, they've kind of been there some races, not been there others. And, I mean, where was his teammate today? She was very far down the order, but that's probably a topic for a different time. But yeah, Munoz just massively impressed with him.
Yeah, he is definitely a star for the future, and unfortunately, looks like Ana Crasco again just doesn't seem to get on well with the Moto 3 bikes. Whatever it seems to be the difference between a World Supersport 300 to a GP Moto 3 bike. She ended up getting a long lap penalty as well today, so again, with her joined the paddock, it was kind of a last minute deal. It was like, I kind of need a ride. I'll have to take something. She's better when she's better than what she's showing.
Yeah, somebody
Unfortunately,
else's deal. I think it was Salvador. I think his deal fell
yeah.
through with that team. I think sponsorship, so she picked that up. And yeah, I mean, I was kind of expecting her to be a bit better because of how good she was in Super Sport 300. But yeah, it is a shame to see her struggling so much.
She's a world champion in her own right. But we're going to move on now to someone else who's struggling. It's not just one man; it's a whole manufacturer, and it is Honda. They are still nowhere. And one thing I noticed about Honda in Catalonia, especially, was they always rave about the top end speed of the Leopards, and in fairness, they're fairly good. But the thing is, Honda seem to get great corner speed, but they seem to get massively shunted when they have a KTM in front. I was watching Foggia come out of the final corner in P4, and he went nowhere. He doesn't seem to, unless he has clear track in front of him, he can't use that top speed. Even with slipstream, he seemed to just get bogged down. So it looks like they have a bit of a weird kind of maybe like the mid range power just isn't there, because they seem to, when they get a good run onto the straights, they seem to be the quickest by the end of it. But overall, Hondas are quite badly off the pace compared to the KTM's. Reese, what you think has gone wrong with the Japanese manufacturer?
Well, it's actually an interesting point you bring up there because I hadn't noticed that in the race. But now that I think about it, yeah, definitely he couldn't make the when he wasn't in clean air, or when either of them weren't in clean air, because to be fair, Suzuki was there this weekend. That is probably worth noting. He seems to have stepped his game up a little bit last couple of races. But even still, yeah, when those two when those two Leopard bikes were in the lead, they were rapid. I mean, Guevara several times would get in the slipstream of either Suzuki or Foggia, go to pull out and make a move, and then just drop back. And it wasn't like he was rolling out of it. He was still going, he was keeping it pinned. Just those bikes are so fast. But yeah, it's interesting that you note that when they're actually behind a KTM, they don't have it. So yeah, maybe it's when they can't take their line. Maybe it's a bit similar to the Yamaha in GP, or maybe their speed is to do with the actual intake of air in the first place. Perhaps they have a different air intake that they've designed or something, and perhaps once it has dirty air or hot air from the bike in front, sort of disturbed air, perhaps it doesn't work so well. So that is interesting. But Honda as a manufacturer as a whole, they are nowhere. I mean, the Leopards are the only guys really anywhere. I think Riccardo Rossi was the next one after that, but I'm not 100% sure. I mean, they just weren't in the top group at all. No Hondas anywhere. Worth noting, Andrea Mino, he was down in about 20th or something like that, ended up getting a long lap, ended up retiring. I don't know whether he had a problem or whether it's just he's so far off it wasn't worth his time.
He took a long lap, went over the line, was given another one, and pulled into the pits at the end of that lap.
Yeah,
That summed up his race.
Yeah, pretty much. So Honda, they are in trouble. We've said it quite a few episodes now. I think we first brought it up around Portimao time because it's the first time it's really obvious. But yeah, the KTM's the bike you want to be on in Moto3 now. I can say that 100%. Or a Leopard Honda, but I'd still want to be on any KTM other than that, to be honest, because, well, look at the championship, kind of says it yourself. So yeah, Honda, they are in a bit of a mess in both Moto3 and MotoGP. So they'll definitely have to bring something to the table for next year, otherwise no one is going to want that bike.
Yeah, very good points as always. Now we're going to move on to the Moto2 race. And the Moto2 race this weekend was pretty good, I must say. For once I didn't sleep through it and wake up and get filled in by the commentators. I actually was wide awake, enjoyed every lap of it. It was probably down to the fact it was such a low grip. Everyone was kind of fighting a losing battle against the tyre grip and the degradation. They all seem to have very similar pace. A few riders stood out in particular, but we'll get to them in a minute. We're going to have to start off with Joe Roberts. Great pace out of the box, looked seconds quicker than everyone else. I was watching him thinking, usually when you go that much quicker than someone else and everyone else is managing their pace, it's 90% of the time the rider who's pushing is the one at risk and not the other 27, 28 riders on the grid that are kind of minding their tyres and holding their pace. And unfortunately, he did end up tipping off into turn 5. Very easily done, but surely at this point now, he's not a rookie. He's been there long enough. Surely it will click that I'm pulling away 3/10 a lap here. Everyone else is going slow. All I need to do now is drop my pace, match them, and bring this around and just kind of keep it, manage the gap. But no, he kept pushing and unfortunately tipped off. What have you made of Joe Roberts over the last, we'll say, 2 months since he got his victory in Portimao?
It definitely seems like something has clicked for him, doesn't it? Because, I mean, if we think back to when he was in American racing, what, 2020 was the last season he had there? He had some standout performances. I mean, remember his pole at Qatar? He was so fast at that circuit. He had that a couple other times as well throughout that season where he was looking good. He looked like he could get a podium. He looked like he could win the race. And you'd think moving to Italtrans, which should really... Well, I'd say should be an upgrade because, of course, that was a title-winning team that year. But American Racing itself is a pretty decent team, to be fair. I mean, especially now it's got a bit more money behind it and they've got Calex's. It's a decent team. So I was expecting maybe a bit of a step up. But he's really struggled. I think there's been a bit of a culture clash maybe there. You know, obviously him being American, the team being Italian. Obviously very different cultures, really. Complete opposite sides of the world, really. Obviously Europe and North America so far away from each other. But it seems like the last couple of races, he's really, really stepped it up. Portimao, of course, he won the race, and that will be the thing he remembers. And to be honest, that probably did fill him with a bit of confidence, because obviously it showed him he could do it. But that's it was like a 10th place finish, really, wasn't it, at the end of the day? Because, you know, all the fast guys crashed off. Obviously, even on the restart, him and Dixon were going away, and Dixon fell off. So, you know, I mean, obviously he had to stay on. Joe Roberts had to stay on in the tricky conditions, so fair play to him, and he fully deserves that race win. But that's not what convinces me. It's rides like what he had in Mugello, where he finished second, and rides where, alright, he fell off today, but he did show good pace before doing so, which he hasn't shown since he was on American Racing. So I think he's made a step. That doesn't really answer your question, I know that, but if we talk about actually what he was doing in this race, yeah, he had great pace, but he was clearly pushing over the limit. I think Jake Dixon said it, I think, after the race, that he saw him pulling away and he thought, you know, you're doing if you finish this race, you've done an amazing job. And I think everybody kind of knew it was a matter of time that either Joe Roberts fell off or was caught by the pack because he'd wore his tyre out. It was going to be one of the two. And sadly for Joe, it was the one where he ended up in the gravel and the early bath, you know, out of the race. So just a shame, but it's promising. He could take positives from it, and I hope he does. I hope he doesn't beat himself up too much because, of course, he was trying to win a race. He was actually probably bringing himself into championship contention before that, which is something you didn't realise. You didn't realise how consistent he was. So, yeah, Joe Roberts, I think he could take some, definitely take some solace from this race, but, yeah, just a bit of a mistake there. Easy done into turn 5, and it went pretty late as well, but, yeah, just pushing too hard and fell off on a greasy track.
And it is a good point to mention as well. After Jerez, there was a Jerez test for pretty much everyone, and a lot of riders you've seen now from Jerez who went to Le Mans. Some riders have made a big step, including Joe. A lot of people found and figured out things at the Jerez test. So
was it not a Catalonia test?
There was one in Jerez though, directly
was
after
there one
the
in
race.
Jerez as well? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough.
And like, for example, Digi found good pace. Obviously, he's a GP rider, but there's throughout the two classes, there is a series, kind of a few riders that you go, well, he was kind of nowhere in Jerez, and then Le Mans, he was somewhere in Mugello, and then now again. So maybe whatever they've managed to work out, again, it's very well noted that you only have kind of an hour and a half of track time before qualifying for most weekends, and you're into the kind of, you have to put a lap in, and then you're into warm up and you're into the race. There's not much time if you're struggling for setup or for a feel of the bike. So a day's riding on a nice track usually does help out a lot of riders. But moving forward now to one of my favourite parts of the Moto2 class is Vietti. Vietti is the real deal. It's taken me 9 rounds to say it, but I'm happily now, I'm going to touch wood, just quick tap of my table, just because I've been saying it since round 1 that he was my dark horse for the season, and throughout the race wins, the podiums, everything, I was like, well, we'll see when we get to Europe. Then we got to Jerez, to Portimao. He got a bit lucky here and there. And we're still kind of going, well, we'll see. But I'm actually quite confident saying he is probably one of 2 riders that I reckon will win the championship. The other one is someone who struggled this weekend, Iagora. We'll come to him later. Mugello possibly could have won that. Definitely, in my opinion, on the podium. Mechanical. Now, we could argue he's probably done 340,000 laps with Rossi and the boys around there. Probably has a minor advantage, you could say. But Catalunya that's fair game for everyone. So for him to be that quick in a tough, tricky track like that, he's shown true mettle there, and I'm quite happily would be fond of him as my title favourite going into it. What did you make of Cesarino Vietti's race in Momelo?
Yeah, I think similarly to what you said, it's kind of confirmed it to me that he's definitely actually in this hunt. It's not Baldassare syndrome, thankfully. It really is. He's taken it on because, of course, we've been able to say that like the whole season. We've had reasons why he's been getting good performances. Obviously, the first few races they are usually weird. I mean, we can actually see some of the riders that were there that in those races have now dropped off a bit. Like Chancha's probably a really good example of that. But Vietti, he was there getting into Europe. Obviously, struggled in Portimao, got lucky because of the crashes. Jerez, he was kind of, well, he was about 6th place, which is a bit harsh, really, for us to say was nowhere. But compared to how he had been, I suppose you get used to that expectation. In Le Mans, what happened in Le Mans? Oh, Le Mans, actually, he struggled, didn't he? And then he made the mistake, ran in the gravel, and actually had a very good comeback ride. That was a good race for him there. Mugello, like you say, the mechanical. So, yeah, it's been one of those things where there's always been something that's happened to stop us saying, oh, he looks really quick. But today, he kept a cool head. He obviously put it on pole after coming through Q1, which, you know, in itself was a bit of a shock to me. I wasn't properly watching qualifying. I had it on sort of in the background. I was talking to people and stuff. And I looked at the end of the session and I went, he's on pole? Because he'd gone through Q1. I didn't think he had the pace. So it was actually quite surprising to see that. He didn't get the best start. I mean, it wasn't terrible, don't get me wrong. But he dropped back a bit, kept a cool head. A few fell off in front, obviously like Roberts, for example. But he just fought his way through and he fought that victory to the last lap with Aaron Canet. It was a really nice battle. And he had a clear advantage. It was fantastic to see. I remember to turn one, particularly one occasion, he gained about maybe 3 bike lengths on Jake Dixon into that first corner. It wasn't like Dixon broke early. He broke the same point that Canet in front of him did. So it's one of those things where he gained so much there. And into turn 10, he made 3 passes in the end, didn't he? He passed Dixon there once and he passed Canet there twice. But the first 2 times where he passed Canet and Dixon, he just pulled to the inside. It was a mirror signal manoeuvre. It was a fantastic pass. So Vietti, yeah, he had a battle with Agora in that race as well. He gave him a bit of elbow. Agora gave him a bit back. They got, so he's shown that he can race. He can keep his head cool. He can put it on pole. He can lead from the front. So yeah, I don't think it would be fair to say that he's not the real deal at this point because he's shown that he can do everything in different conditions, in tricky conditions on the track. So yeah, Vietti, yeah, got to say, him and Agora, like you say, I think are looking favourites. Canet's still definitely in there as well, if you ask me. Even though he's made a few mistakes, he's still got the pace because he's there every weekend.
Yeah, and it was a good point as well that Vietti didn't get a good start. He actually had to fight back from it. A bit like Mugello, kind of came through late. He seems maybe to be pretty good on tyres. Again, 2 pretty hard races for him, and he's managed to get to the front. So right now, with the current rider form, I'm going to tip him as my title favourite. Of course, when we get into the last quarter of the season, when we go to Asia, I'm sure Agora will be right there, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out because, as you say, Canet is looking good, and we'll get to him in a second. He did have a good race. I think he just doesn't have that raw pace and maybe that race craft, and maybe next year he could be a real championship threat, but maybe this year I think he's just, especially he got injured. There's just a few things kind of holding him back. I reckon that'll stop him. But we're going to move on to Canet now. Good race, solid performance. Could have gotten his first win if it wasn't for a small mistake on the final lap. But again, good signs from someone that's come back from a horrific injury. What did you make of the little Spaniard's performance?
It was a good race from him. Like you say, once again, not being able to win the race. It's, always a bridesmaid, never the bride. Sadly for Canet, he must be getting frustrated the amount of second places he's had at this point, but that's what wins championships at the end of the day. But of course, he has also crashed out of a few races, so you can't really use that argument too much. He did what he needed to do this weekend, had a good result, still showed good pace as well, because of course he'd fallen off in the previous race, so he's put that behind him now by putting his points on the board. Like you say, he had the injury, which was really nasty with his wrist. I'm still so impressed by his Jerez ride. I'm, it was MotoGP ride of the season, to be honest, with how he managed to pull that one off. But yeah, he's looking like he's got the pace. He did make a small mistake. He went very defensive into turn 10, and I feel like that's actually what cost him, because he didn't need to go right up by like the white line, because Vietti was never going to go like that early anyway. It was always going to be a bit of a late move from Vietti, and I think, to be honest, that kind of ruined him a little bit by then affecting his entry to the corner, so allowing him to go for that later move in the corner. So yeah, it was one of those things, a little bit of a mistake there, but honestly, pretty faultless race. I guess in a similar manner to to Vietti. He did have a bit of a battle. He had a bit of a battle with Jake Dixon, didn't he, a couple of times? He actually got hit by Jake Dixon at turn 10 on one occasion as well, so I suppose he was lucky to stay aboard from that, although it was only a minor touch, really. It was just sort of a front wheel at the inside. So, yeah, good race on Canet, and put some more points on the board, but he has lost more points to Vietti, so that is quite crucial that he can't really keep affording that because, of course, he's DNF'd a few times now.
Yeah, and you did mention Dixon there. Dixon had a good race. Again, 2 races in a row now. He hasn't crashed. Again, I'm going to touch wood. I'm going to touch it twice for Dixon because that poor boy gets as much bad luck as anyone.
Maybe it's bad as lows.
Oh, Jesus. There's not enough wood in my house to touch that poor boy. But Dixon, great performance. Very unlucky to miss out on the podium. What did you make of his ride? And a bit of a weird warning he got midway through the race.
Yeah, I think it was a good ride. He did exactly what he needed to do. Obviously, he's shown the pace all season. We know he's got the pace, and that's just, a second race where I say he's really shown the pace. Probably even more impressive than his Austin race because he didn't have so many people fall off in front of him, whereas in Austin there was a bit attritional, wasn't it? Quite a lot of people fell off the race where he actually got the podium. So yeah, I think it was a good race. He was in the podium. He looked comfortable. He didn't really look like he was going to make much of a mistake. I think he made a minor mistake on the final lap. It allowed Augusto Fernandez through. Augusto had looked the previous lap. He knew where he was going to attack. I think the only things I could really point out was turn 1. A couple of occasions he went in a bit deep, sucked in by the riders in front, when really he could have been in a good position to pick up the pieces between the Vietti-Canet battle if he'd got the braking right, because they were slowing each other down a little bit through the first corner making passes. He could have probably had a run on one of them, but yeah, it was a good ride from Dixon. Managed to keep it upright, so yeah, that's 2 good races in a row for him. Going into Sachsenring now, I'm not exactly sure about how good he is there. I seem to remember he was a little bit more competitive at Sachsenring last year than he had been at some of the other races, so hopefully he can try and take that momentum forward. But yeah, good ride for Dixon.
Yeah, very, very good points again. But we're going to move on now to MotoGP, and we have so much to discuss. So much to discuss that I wasn't even in the race. We're going to start off with pretty much as the weekend started, more paddock rumours. So the current table musical chair situation is Jack Miller is going to Red Bull KTM. Enea Bastianini is getting promoted, but we don't know how far up the Ducati ladder yet. Miguel Oliveira, who's going to be replaced by Jack Miller, is going to take Bastianini's seat. There's possibly both of the Tech 3 KTM boys are out of the job. Paul Espargaro might be coming back to KTM as a satellite rider. Also, Miguel might be having a nibble at Alex Marquez's seat. Alex Marquez might be out of the job. It looks like Taka Nakagami's out of a job. And potentially Darren Binder might be after earning his way onto a second seat at Aprilia. And Mir looks pretty nailed on to sign alongside Marquez. So, pretty crazy. Suzuki pulling out, 2 Yamahas going missing, 2 more Aprilias. It's been a crazy few weeks. What have you made of these rumours, and which ones are your favourite?
I think there's some really, really spicy ones in there, because kind of going into this weekend, we knew Miller factory KTM. That's done deal. They didn't hide that very well in Mugello, that's basically what's happening. And then coming into this weekend, we've had this Pole to Tech 3 rumour, which kind of makes sense because by the sounds of it, I mean, you look at the performance really. Fernandez and Gardner are not having a good time. Fernandez didn't want to ride the KTM in the first place. Gardner's not having a good time. His management, I think, have been dissing KTM management as well, which, if you want to keep your MotoGP ride, is not the best thing to do. But I guess he just wants out of there, no matter what. I mean, he's in pain. They keep crashing. The KTM is just not a great bike either. It seems to be very, very weird. But some of those rumours are a little bit interesting. So, like I said, the Pole to Tech 3 one, that's new for this weekend. There's also Pole to LCR, potentially. There's just kind of musical chairs with the Hondas, because we know really that Paul is on his way out of Repsol Honda, because it seems like Mir is pretty much on for that seat. So Paul can either be demoted to, the other Honda seat, to the LCR, or he can return to KTM, which I think could be quite good for him, because he did a good job there. Obviously, Tech 3 apparently has been offered to Oliveira as well. He made his thoughts on that very clear, as he should, really. I mean, you're not going to take that demotion lightly, especially when he's not doing a terrible job. He's had a bit of a tough season, but today, for example, he was right behind Brad Binder. Brad Binder is the KTM Golden Child, as we know, so finishing right behind him, that's what really they're employing him to do. But I guess at the end of the day, he has made a lot of mistakes and had a lot of bad weekends. So he obviously didn't want that. And then obviously Oliveira has been linked to LCR, like you say. But it looks like he's going to Gresini now, because there was actually pictures of him and his manager, which is his dad, actually in the Gresini hospitality and with some Ducati personnel. So it looks like that's probably cottoned on, and that is the spiciest of the transfers as far as I'm concerned, because we know the Gresini team is good. We've seen them win and put the bike on pole several times, so that's obviously good. Oliveira, one of the better riders on the grid in my opinion. I think he's a fantastic rider. So to see him on a Ducati, that is spicy. I really hope that one is the case. It seems like it is, so I'm looking forward to seeing that next year.
I see indeed. And just before we move on from the rumours, Ducati factory seat still is a question mark. Miller leaving doesn't mean they have to confirm anyone. From the deep dark web rumours, it's likely that they want Jorge Martin. They favour Martin for long-term success more than they do Bastianini. So this weekend, Martin doing well, podium P2, Bastianini gravel again. It could be that they're just trying to wait out Bastianini, hoping for a dip, give a couple of rounds to Jorge Martin, who's going for surgery tomorrow, the day directly after the race. He's going to miss. There's a test tomorrow in Catalonia, but he won't be there. He's going for surgery on his wrist, I believe. And moving forward, I think they might be trying to wait him out to see can they get him in there instead of Bastianini, which is a bit of a weird one, considering Bastianini's been so quick. He is Italian, and Jorge Martin is Spanish, but looks like Ducati want the next big thing from Spain, and it looks like that's what they're trying to hold out for, because you would imagine they would have already signed Bastianini and announced it if Jack was. Ciabatti confirmed in an interview with the Dazan, the Spanish media, that it's 99% sure Jack will not continue with us in 2023. So someone's going to take that seat. It's down to the two of them. I'd be surprised if it wasn't Jorge Martin, to be brutally honest. But we're going to move on now to the actual race weekend. We're going to get to the race, and there was drama like 2006 all over again. We hadn't even made it to turn one. Riders on the ground, a bit of a scary crash. What did you make of Taka Nakagami and the onslaught he created?
Well, firstly, thankfully, he seems to be relatively okay. I mean, I'm sure he's not absolutely fine, but it has been reported that he hasn't got any head injuries or anything like that. He's mainly got pain in his collarbone, and where else was it? His shoulder as well that he had?
Shoulder, collarbone, and a bit of a neck injury, I think.
Yeah, which makes sense, because if you haven't seen the crash, it's quite nasty. So if you don't like that kind of thing, I wouldn't recommend looking it up. But of course, the rider is okay. So if you did want to see what happened, and MotoGP have posted it on their YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen the crash, then you can have a look there. But his head, absolutely rams into the back of Bagnaiy's bike, ripped his visor clean off, and obviously the parts that hold the visor in on the Arai came off as well. So yeah, good job. Arai has done its job there. Obviously one of the very, very trusted helmet manufacturers in the paddock. But yeah, it was just one of those incidents where it was a bit careless, really. I mean, it's easy done. It's turn one. It's easy to lock the front or to brake a bit late and make a bit of a mistake. But he he doesn't take people out a lot, to be honest. He doesn't have a reputation for that. I will give him that. But he has a reputation of losing the front a lot and crashing under pressure and making mistakes. So he's got a bit of form for doing this. Obviously, he already had the incident last weekend. I don't know if we touched on it on the podcast, the incident with Rins. I don't know if the footage was actually available when we did it, but yeah, it was a weird incident there. And I mean, that wasn't his fault. That was 100% not his fault. This time, though, yeah, he locked the front, skittled out, a championship contender, which doesn't change it. That shouldn't change it. Either way, all the riders are equally important when it comes to giving out penalties and things like that. But he's taken out a championship contender, taken out Rins, given Rins a pretty bad injury as well. Sort of broke his wrist, so Rins is going to be out of the test, which is obviously going to affect the rest of his season. So yeah, a bit of a careless move by Nakagami. It's lap one. You got to take a bit carefully. I think he got a bit of a stoppy and then grabbed more brake obviously to try and not hit the back of Bagnaia and lock the front. He probably would have been better trying to thread the needle and sitting up, but that's easy for me to say, sat on the settee, isn't it? Obviously, Taka's on board the bike, going 200 mile an hour around the circuit, so it's it's a shame. I mean, I think at this point, the last few races, he's been a bit more aggressive than normal. I think he probably maybe has been told by the scenes that he's lost his job and he's just trying to prove himself just to try and get a ride somewhere else. And sadly, this is not the way to do it.
Yeah, there is lots of angles of it, and one angle in particular is a drone footage, and you just see him coming into turn one. He just moves across his Honda teammate and the Repsol Honda teammate of Paul Espargaro. You just see the bike step out slightly. He gets a bit of a stop. He has to release the brake to get the bike back down, and that's when the closing speed between him and the Ducati in front starts to close down. Grabs a handful, like you said, very easily done. Thankfully, he seems to be relatively okay. It is a pretty scary crash. Obviously, you have the back wheel of Pecco rotating forward, so as soon as he touches it, he gets dragged into the back, in the cowling area of the bike. Could have been scary. Thankfully, he looks like he got away with it. Unfortunately, Rins has a broken wrist and will miss the test tomorrow. Not sure that Suzuki would have much to be testing anyway, but nonetheless, Suzuki are a bit lost at the moment. But we're going to move on now to pretty much the alien of the class. Probably, in my opinion, right now, the best rider on the planet, bar none. Fabio Masterclass. What did you make of Quartararo in Barcelona?
The man manages to impress me every single time. I don't know how he does it, and now I expected a better race from him than I expected going into Mugello, so I should have really saw him winning, really, because, I expected maybe 10th place in Mugello, and he came second and almost won the race, really. He was pushing Bagnaia quite hard. But this race, amazing. I mean, Aleix was top all weekend, top in all the sessions. Fabio was really nowhere until qualifying. Now, I think maybe he's just trying different things in the free practices now. I think he's so comfortable with the bike that if he sticks his base setting in, he knows he'll automatically go pretty quickly. So he's probably just trying to find something new, just see if he can maybe get a bit more top speed. As we've seen over the years, top speed is not so important for a one-lap event, especially at Catalunya, where there's so many high-speed corners. So he put himself on the front row, exactly where he needed to be. Fantastic start from him. I don't know how he gets that Yamaha off the line so well, because it just has so much... Well, actually, I don't think it is the acceleration necessarily that is where it lacks. I think it actually punches fairly well initially. So off the line, their ride height device actually seems quite good as well, to be fair, the Yamaha. And he got a good launch. Managed to get past Bagnaia immediately. Obviously, get a slipstream on Aleix, pass Aleix straight to the first corner. Then, of course, there was a crash behind, which probably took out one of his biggest threats to the race win. Of course, like I said, Aleix was the quickest all weekend, but Bagnaia, again, he was up there. You can always count on Bagnaia on a Sunday. I mean, he does sometimes make mistakes. He may not have finished the race on his own accord. He may well have crashed trying to beat Fabio, but the challenger was immediately taken out by, obviously, Nakagami taking out him and Rins. So Fabio, once he got to the front, he checked out immediately. He went for it. It was amazing. He was about 2 seconds in front by the first few laps, and then he was 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then I think he was about 6 seconds in front at the end. So yeah, that's how you would on the Yamaha, really. You can't pass because you're so far down on power. It shows that the bike is good, especially if you can ride it like Fabio can, but it's just not got the top end, and that just ruins you. So you have to qualify well. Fabio has the ability to do that. He also has the ability to clock off the laps, lap and lap and lap. Immediately looks so fast and just not make mistakes. So yeah, like you said, alien, best rider on the grid by far now. I think the only rider that's anywhere near his level is Marquez, and obviously Marquez is not there. So yeah, Fabio cleaning up, fantastic, because it didn't look like he was going to heading into the race.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we're probably not going to see Marquez for the rest of the season, which is a shame because we're probably being robbed of some serious battles, serious lap times with Marquez being away. But hopefully, we wish him well. He had surgery, actually. We should mention that during the week. It went well, but to be fair, after every surgery so far he's had, it always has gone well, but it's what comes in the days afterwards. But let's, again, touch more wood. We're touching more wood than we've ever done before in this podcast. Just hopefully he has a safe recovery, gets back to some full felt, and gets a bit of training under his belt. And we should see him back on the grid, hopefully in 23, alongside a younger Spanish teammate, bit of a Rossi Lorenzo, one coming in to replace the other. We might have a nice little
wall down the garage.
Yeah, wall down the garage between the riders. That would be crazy, wouldn't it? But moving on, actually, forgot to completely mention Fabio signed 2 years with Yamaha.
Oh yeah, of course.
And there is a massive bit of news as well that has not been reported anywhere. I have to shout out Simon Patterson of the race for this one. Yamaha have always built everything in-house. Their engineers build everything. They do not believe in getting outside help until now. Maybe it's Fabio's forced their hand in this. But they have
I
signed. Now, I
think it
don't
is
have
in
the
his
gentleman's name.
contract. I think it is something in the contract where they got to give him more power, so it might be forced by Fabio.
Yeah, there you go. It's definitely something to do with Fabio, but they're signing an ex-Toyota, ex-Aprilia, so Formula One GP, someone who is pretty renowned with getting more horsepower out of an engine that is struggling, which would be scary if a Yamaha is quicker in a straight line than what we have now, because he's already pretty much best into the corner, best out of the corner, best through the corner. It's just the last 100 yards of every straight he gets eaten. That could be big going forward. Now, whether it's just to keep him happy and they don't use it, like test riders, they want like Rossi and Vinales wanted test riders in the European test team. They got it. It was never used. It was just something they did in the background, but they never actually used it. Bradley Smith was there, Lorenzo, Cal. You rarely hear them testing, so whether this is just another thing goes, we'll give you that, but we're not going to actually do anything with it, I don't know. But hopefully for Fabio's sake, they do actually put it to good use, because this gentleman in question here has some serious knowledge. It'd be pretty interesting to see what they could do with a bit more horsepower. The dynamic in that bike would be pretty crazy. But moving on now, on to someone we've already touched briefly on this podcast, Enea Bastianini. Cracks starting to form, Reese, in his season.
It seems that way. It really does. It's 2 races in a row now he's fallen off. He also fell off in Portimao, so that's 3 races out of 9, so that's a third of the races he's not finished. So it's not great. I mean, you could probably argue that at this point, right, he's probably hitting the limit of the bike. We're like halfway through the season now, which is quite scary. We've got through that pretty quick, although I suppose it's getting through the year as well. I don't even want to talk about that. But either way, it seems like the factory bikes are the bikes to be on now, you know. Except Miller, actually. That's worth noting. Miller, the last 2 weekends, has really been struggling, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's something to do with the fact he's on his way out of that team, to be honest. But that is something I just thought of right there. But either way, the GP22 seems better now. You had both Zarco and Martin at the front. You would have had Bagnaia if he hadn't got taken out. He was obviously at the front of the race, so you expect him to be up there. So I think it is at this point now where that bike is starting to slip back. You're not going to get any more out of it. He's probably already got the base setting dialed. He's not going to find any more with that bike now. And I think his poor qualifying has kind of returned as well because of that. And I think that's what matters so much. Like, a lot of these bikes are good race bikes, but if you don't qualify well, you get absolutely ruined. So, yeah, he made another mistake trying to come through the pack. 2 races in a row, 3 in total, if I'm not mistaken, which, is about a third of the season. So, yeah, it does seem like he's starting to crack a little bit now, maybe under the pressure, maybe trying to make the most out of a bite. It's not quite there anymore. And I think I think it's safe to say he's probably out of the title hunt now. I don't think he's going to take it any further than this.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's probably a step too far. It's always been that a rider on a satellite team is always going to struggle to win the title. I think Fabio in 2020 had the best chance of doing it just because it was such a weird season. But unfortunately, Yamaha just kind of went the wrong way with the bike that year. Still stands this only rider in history is Valentino to win in a satellite team. Yes, he had a factory bike, but in modern day MotoGP, everyone has a factory bike in an early satellite team.
You also had factory crew.
Oh yeah, he's pretty much a factory team.
It was just Mick doing his bike painted in Astra Azzurra colours.
Yeah. He really was.
But technically, the stat does still exist.
He's retired now. We can pretty much say as much as we want. We can big him up as much as we want.
Rossi was a god. No one could get near Rossi.
Yeah, exactly.
3 seconds quicker than everybody. Yeah.
But just to move on to the other Rossi, the Marini side of the garage. Correct me if I'm wrong. He's on a GP22 as well, I believe.
Yes, he is.
So again, going back to the Jerez test, he said he found something was breaking. He's been there 2 weekends in a row.
Yeah, he was a lot better again, wasn't he?
So it looks like maybe he's found something with the balance of the bike, like we mentioned, the braking. So again, just a small thing. We're not going to go into depth on Luca Marini, but it's good to see him showing some good pace in his second season. On to another Ducati, someone we're going to focus a bit more on, Jorge Martin. Is he back to his best, and has he just signed a contract with a factory Ducati team, do you believe?
I'm not so sure that he's signed the contract yet. I think it's been very difficult because of Bastianini and Martin's performances. Like, I think, if you look at last year, it was nailed on. They were probably getting ready. They were in negotiations. But then Martin, he's been crashing. He's been struggling. I don't even know how many races he's crashed out of. It's more than 3, so he's doing worse than Bastianini on that front. But he has been competitive at some of them. Like, for example, he was pretty competitive in Argentina. Obviously, he was second place there, but that's basically the only time he's been anywhere all season except this weekend. So he struggled a lot there. And I think that has been what's made this decision for the contract so difficult. I think he was virtually nailed on, so they probably told him that he was basically had the seat. Now all of a sudden, Bastianini's out of there, and they're like, "Oh, should we get Bastianini because he's Italian?" But obviously, Martin. I'm sure there's really good reason to have a Spaniard in the team, especially commercially. So it's one of those things, and obviously, maybe if you look at Martin, perhaps you'd say he has the bigger potential. So I don't know. It's hard to say. But he's back to his best, it seems. Apparently, it was a thing to do with the forks, which seems like a very interesting thing. Apparently, they changed the forks to the same sort of setting Pecco was using to try and up their pace to Pecco's pace. And he's been struggling, and that's why he's been struggling. It doesn't suit his style. He's been crashing and not been doing too well. And now they seem to revert it back, and he's back on form immediately. So that is, something potentially that could have happened there, potentially in this Jerez test. He's tested that, and that's what's given him back the pace. And I think it does seem like he's back to his best now. So it's nice to see, because I quite like Jorge Martin, and it's not been nice to see him crashing his brains out and being nowhere. So yeah, it's good. I think he definitely is back now as well. He's got the surgery tomorrow, so hopefully that goes well for him, and hopefully he's back on the bike pretty quick, and he's still got his pacer behind him.
Yeah, thankfully we do have 2 weeks between Barcelona and Sachsenring, so he should have just enough time to kind of get over the surgery and get some mileage back on the wrist before we head to Germany. But we're going to have to come to the part of the podcast that we're dreading, the last bit before we go on to the race direction, which is going to be a bit of a funny bit.
Yeah.
Aleix Espargaro, my goodness. If anyone hasn't seen it, he rolled off a lap early and gave away a podium at his home race. I feel so bad for him. When he did realise it, he was passed by 3 Ducatis. Now, a lot of people have slated him and said a lot of things about him. In the heat of the moment, 65 degrees track temperature. It's probably an ambient 35 degrees. You've just done a 38, 39 minute race at absolute race lap record. Your home race, you were being built up all weekend to win. He crossed the line to start the last lap. He started waving, rolled off, realised after he got passed by 2 Ducatis and then a third one, and jumped back onto the back of Luca Marini. Passed him, came home. But what a disaster that was.
Yeah, it's one of the things. I feel so bad for him, but it was quite funny. It's just one of those things like, he just starts waving to the crowd, and it's like, no, mate, you got to keep going. It's kind of funny, but I feel so sorry for him, because I really like Aleix. I love the whole underdog Aprilia story, to be honest. It's home race as well. It rode so well, because obviously Fabio had completely disappeared. Martin passed him a couple of times. He managed to get back in front. It looked like at one point he was really struggling with the tyres and he was going to go backwards. He was struggling to hit an apex. And to be honest, in the past, he probably would have crashed in that situation. But this new Aleix Espargaro, he's on the pace. He doesn't make mistakes, except obviously this one here. But he rode so well. He thought he'd just finished second place. And apparently what he said was his pit board is so close to the last corner because Aprilia had the first pit boxes this weekend. So he looked at the gap, saw it was about 0.5 to Martin, and didn't catch the lap counter. So he he had to look at the timing tower. So the big tower at the exit of pit lane, and it had L1, and he thought that meant, that was the last lap. It had finished, like that was it. But at Catalunya, the timing tower says L0, so that means there's 0 laps after this one when you start the final lap. So he thought that it was done. He thought the race was done. Obviously, he read the board, read the tower wrong, and he started celebrating. It's just, I feel so sorry for him. Obviously, it said L0 on the tower because obviously they're starting the final lap, and he thought L0 means 0. That's it. He's done, and just such a shame for him. But at least he could take the solace that he was quick. He managed to get second place at his home race. Obviously, that's not going to mean anything to him. The fact that he could have got second place. But at the same time, he's very fortunate that it was a bit more of a spread out race because, of course, he got passed by both the Pramacs. Then Mir went past him, and that's when he looked behind him. He's like, they're still going. That's when Marini got in front. I think if I've calculated it correctly, I think he's only lost 9 points from that. So we'll have to take that into account at the end. But if he loses the title by less than 9 points, he will be absolutely kicking himself. Poor Aleix. Bless him.
I have a big fear that this could be the start of the end of a season. No, it might seem very
bit dramatic.
yeah, exactly. But He came in. When he actually finished the race, he stopped at turn one and just head on the tank, cried his eyes out, rode round into the box, into the corner, turned his chair around, and literally pushed himself into a corner. And you could vividly hear him bawling his eyes out. The poor boy. And I think that's going to go on. And as well 2 weeks off before he got to Sachsenring, hold him after a home race. That's not going to sit well with him. It might make him push more at Sachsenring. He might crash again. Then that turns into, he lost 9 points. Oh, he's 0 points. Fabio's P2. That's 29 points he's lost in 2 races. And then he's just out of touch, out of sync with the front two. So I hope he bounces back from it. I fear that he might crumble now after that. He was on such a good form. No mistakes except this small one. It's one of those kind of silly mistakes that can happen. Again, like I said, he's long race, last corner, it's fast, your pit boards, it's tiny, you're doing 180 miles an hour. Lots of reasons. People have been way too harsh on the poor boy. But I was so gutted. Because when it first crossed the line, he was kind of hands on his head because he kind of lost the race win. But from my first initial thoughts is that he's after breaking down, and he was rolling down the pits and he just had a waving at the fans, and I thought it was like, geez, he seems very okay with after breaking down. He probably just kind of is like over it, and he kind of like realizes nothing he can do now. There's no point being sad. And that's why he was waving at people. But then the Aprilia pit box, they cut to them. They were shouting. They were fuming, unfortunately, running around like heads of chickens. I'm not really sure how he didn't notice it when Jorge Martin came past him, bangs it back 4 gears, backs it in at right pace, and then Zarco does it. The fact that 3 riders, fair enough if one go past and you go, geez, he's still moving at a serious rate there. Is this race still on? You'd still kind of push maybe for a sector just to see what happened, but again, maybe just the whole emotion, the concentration was let out. I'm not a MotoGP rider, unfortunately, so I can't tell exactly what was going through his head, but geez, we're going to move on now because I can't bear talking anymore about it because he was so emotional, and he's an emotional guy. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and it was a tough watch. You have to feel for him. But we're going to move on now we're going to move on and move back to turn 1. Taki Nakagami taking out Rins and Bagnaia. Rins furious race direction. Reese has a few quotes there. Why don't you take away and say what Rins was saying about race direction and what he thinks about the current crew?
He wasn't happy, to say the least. I don't know if I'm going to directly quote him because I can't remember exactly what he said, but I vaguely remember that he basically said that they should stay at home. Basically, he was just not very happy, and rightfully so, to be honest. He's been taken out. At the time, he didn't know he'd broken his wrist, but he said that his wrist was really hurting him. He didn't have much movement. He said, after these interviews, I'm going to the hospital to get it x-rayed. Obviously, turns out to be broken. He's been taken out in an accident that's not his fault, that's obviously hurt him as well, so he's going to be angry because of that. But you know what? Nakagami should have a penalty for that. I know at the time it does seem harsh because obviously the guy looked fairly hurt. I mean, he smacked his head, so you don't exactly want to be kicking a man while he's down, but he's caused a crash, took 2 riders out. That's a long lap penalty at least, a double long lap, a back of the grid, a pit lane start. I mean, we've seen similar incidents been penalised in the past. I think one that stands out to me, Sam Lowe's 2020 Austria, got a false neutral, wiped out Chantra, and was it Navarro as well? I can't remember the other rider, but pit lane start. Who else did that? Somebody at Chantra, the other way around. Chantra took Lowe's out, long lap penalty. These are the things that happen, and it's a mistake, fair enough. But he just needs to be punished for it, because it was one of those things that it was lap 1, of course, you've got to have a bit of discretion, but he has just lost the front and taken 2 people with him. So, fair enough, Rins is angry, but Rins was mad. He basically was saying that the race direction, they just need all new people, basically get rid of all of them, and, they never really, their decisions just don't make any sense. He was very, very unhappy, and there's been this unease for a few years now from the riders, you could tell, but this is, and you know what, they've said stuff before. There's been things behind the scenes where apparently, Max Biaggi went up to the race direction to find out why Sasaki got a penalty. They accepted that, and then we're like, how do we avoid this penalty in the future? What do we do differently? Apparently, Freddie just walked out of the room, so that's not helpful. So Spencer, the guy in charge, I mean, obviously huge respect for him, and I think all the riders have huge respect for his talent, but he just rubs all the riders up the wrong way. He's just doesn't handle things well. And you could tell it's been building up for a while, but Rins, this is the first time really he's come out like they all need to be sacked, basically. He was not happy. Rins was absolutely furious. Bagnaia also was pretty unhappy. A little bit less severe with his comments, just kind of saying that, that Nakagami needed a penalty. But Rins, you could kind of see why, because especially if you're in pain, that makes you even more angry. So he's sitting there with a throbbing wrist, being told that the guy that's caused this injury, ruined his race, has not been penalised. He's already frustrated by all the penalties. Yeah, he... I don't know if you'll be able to find it online anywhere. It was an interview with, I think it was the interview with BT where he said it. So if you can find that online, he was not pleased.
The one quote that stands out for me from that transcript was that he said, and I quote, "The current race direction are not MotoGP level," which is pretty damning words.
That was really...
Which basically, in other words, they are amateurs. So we end off this podcast how we usually start them, which is giving out about Freddie Spencer and his group of minions up in their little box making questionable decisions. And again, going back to Nakagami not getting a penalty, Suzuki got a penalty in Mugello for a small bit of contact with Anshu. He got a penalty during the race. Yep. Again, I understand the concept of the guy is down, he's hurt, he's had a bad crash. But does that mean if I take someone out tomorrow, can I just lie there, pretend I'm unconscious and get away with a penalty? Is that what we're going to see now? That if Jack Miller takes out Mir and just lies there motionless on the ground for 90 seconds, can he escape a penalty? No, I'm not saying that Nakagami's putting it on. He clearly was injured, but regardless of the injury to riders, the mistake was made, it needs to be penalised. So we're going to end it today with, of course, the take on a poor weekend again from race direction. 2 weeks' time, we go to Dresden in Germany for the Sachsenring race. We've no Marquez. How do you feel the grid will feel now that they don't have the king there for Sachsenring? Do you feel like someone will have their head screwed on more than others?
It will be interesting, because it's difficult to draw a pattern from Sachsenring. It's such a weird circuit. But one thing I do remember, last year, who led the race right at the start? Aleix Espargaro. Who is going to be desperate to get a good result after this embarrassment this weekend? Aleix Espargaro. What bike is working really well? The Aprilia. So I actually think that Aleix could win this one. I genuinely do. Other rider that was really good there last year was Oliveira. He was also very good at this circuit, though, and I mean, he actually wasn't too bad this weekend, to be fair. He was right up there with Brad, like I said, and that's pretty much... I think that's the limit of the bike. Those two are fantastic riders, Oliveira and Binder. Oliveira actually isn't a world champion, but, he definitely has the talent to be one. Brad Binder, of course, is a world champion. So those guys, they're fantastic riders. They've always been very evenly matched when they've been teammates throughout the categories, and obviously that's been shown again here. So I don't think the KTM is going to be troubling the scorer, so I don't think he will be... fighting for the win there, Oliveira. So who else? I mean, the Yamaha historically has not been too bad there. Remember Folger a few years ago, obviously had a really good race, and then the year after, Rossi used Folger's data and video of his lines and things like that to also pull out a good result. So Yamaha's not too bad there. I think Fabio was... I can't remember where he finished. I think he might have been on the podium, so not a terrible result for him. The Ducatis tend to struggle there, so I think it's going to probably be an Aleix Quartararo shootout, if you ask me. I can't see anybody else particularly being up there. If Nakagami's not injured, he might be able to do something, because he does have a little bit of that Marquez about him. Sometimes when he rides the Honda, he does try and sort of mimic Marquez's riding style a little bit. So maybe he could try and do something. But yeah, I think it's going to be between Aleix and Fabio this weekend. Well, next race.
Yeah, the only thing last year that probably held back Aleix was it started spitting raining, and the light rain affected everyone. They also had slowing down. Marquez sped up, and that's where he won that race in just absolute bravery and bigger balls than everyone else. I would put Rins in a corner speed, edge of the tire kind of track, but if he has a broken wrist, that just puts him at 90% for me, and I think you need to be 150% to be beating Fabio Quartararo and to be beating Aleix. So I can't really look past the two of them. I don't think Mir is going to do much for the rest of the season. he just whatever way the bike development has gone, whatever way the setup is, he just can't get it stopped, which is his biggest strength. But now it's probably one of his weaknesses. So it'll be an interesting one. It could be a very follow the leader kind of race because the tire temps and the front tire goes up. They have the aero. It could be an interesting one, but it is Germany. You can always get a bit of rain in Germany. If you go back many years back, I think 2014 was a wet race. 2016 was a wet race. So we've had plenty of wet races over the years. Obviously, we had the dampness last year. So you never know. It could be Fabio Di Giannantonio. He's going to be my wild card if we get a bit of rain because he seems to be on a great upward spiral at the moment. But we're going to end it off there. Just hitting the hour mark for today's podcast. Just want to thank you all for tuning in. If you did enjoy, drop us a like if you are listening on YouTube. Also, if you could give us a 5-star rating on Spotify, it just helps to boost the podcast. Just want to thank you all for myself and Reese. Thanks for listening. See you in the next one.